joined us. Thank you so much for celebrating with us World Human Rights Day today. My name is Molly Mehta, and I'm working as the Vice President for External Affairs at the Medical Students Association of India. And for today's webinar, we have two wonderful speakers with us who will be with whom we'll dive into more detailed discussions regarding this year's theme, which is Recover Better, Stand Up for Human Rights. This is the theme for World Human Rights Day 2020, around which all our discussions will be revolving. Before we dive into the discussions, I would love to introduce both our speakers to all of you. We have Mr. Prabhlok Singh from India, who is a human rights activist and the founder of the Human Rights Protection Group and MFP Federation, which is a community welfare organization and a pressure group. It has fought and continues to fight for justice in cases where justice has been delayed or denied, and has played a major role in the Jessica Lal case, the Arushi murder case, the Captain Sumit Kohli case, the Nirbhaya case, and is pursuing the ongoing Sippi Sadhu case. Mr. Prabhalok is also the president and the curator of the hashtag Leave No One Behind International Conclave on Human Rights, Community Welfare, Philanthropy, and UN SDGs. He has also delivered talks and speeches at various national and international forums, including but not limited to the United Nations headquarters in New York. Sir, thank you so much for joining us today and for taking the time out to discuss about such a vital topic with medical students. Very happy to have you.
Pleasure is all mine, Molly. Thank you so much. They were very kind words, and I'm glad to be a part of this very important event.
Thank you so much, sir, again. Secondly, we have with us today from Bangladesh, Miss Shaheen Anam, who is a human rights and women rights activist and is also the executive director of Manushar Jono Foundation, which is a non-governmental grant-making organization working for human rights and good governance in Bangladesh. She has masters in psychology and so she has masters in psychology and social work from Dhaka University and Hunter College of Social Work, New York. Her work revolves around supporting organizations, movements, and coalitions to ensure human rights of marginalized groups, protect women and children from violence, and making basic services accessible to them. She has been in the forefront of advocating for laws and policies that have impacted on the lives of millions of people, such as the Right to Information Act 2009 and Prevention of Domestic Violence Act 2010, etc. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us today and for taking the time out to address medical students in our webinar today.
Thank you for inviting me. My pleasure.
Thank you so much. With that, I think we can dive into the discussion. And my first question, my first question for today is to Prabhlok sir. And it's like the question is that why do you think human rights are important in the COVID-19 response? The theme, this year's theme has been set like seeing the pandemic. So why do you think in the first place human rights are important in the pandemic response?
Sure. So, Molly, I love this question, and for the very basic reason for what the question is, because the question is, what is the importance of human rights with respect to the response to COVID-19 situation? But I truly feel that human rights are always important. Human rights are important in the times of a pandemic, and human rights are important when it's business as usual or life as usual, when there is no pandemic. So, human rights, the awareness about human rights, the implementation of those rights, it should not just be on paper, but we should practice it in our daily lives. It's always important. And in times of the pandemic, the reference changes. So how we look at those rights completely changes. Now, what happens is the vulnerable lot, the lot which is at the receiving end of those violations, they become even more vulnerable during such times. So the answer to your question is human rights are always important, but they become very critically important during times of pandemic, because those who are vulnerable, they become more vulnerable. It just worsens the problem, And that's why, even when there is no pandemic in our usual lives, we should give a lot of importance to human rights. And only then will we be able to survive such pandemics as a society, as a community together.
Thank you so much for that answer, sir. That was very rightly said. And thank you so much again. With that, I would like to move on to my next question to Anam ma'am. And the question is that the initial pandemic response was largely, a blame game, which led to targeting many minority groups. So, what do you believe are the long-term effects of the same in regard to human rights?
Thank you, and totally agreeing with Mr. Prablok that universal human rights is universal. It is important all the time and for everyone, but especially for those who are powerless and who are most likely to be less left behind from development. Now, in the beginning, it's true that there was a lot of blame game of who is responsible, who is bringing in the virus. For example, our in Bangladesh, our migrant workers who work abroad, they were coming back, and supposedly they brought back. You know, uh, however, not giving the kind of the importance to what the state should have done to protect everybody from this. We have only one airport, one international airport, Dhaka airport, and all our migrant workers were coming from there. Those were coming from Europe and other places. And it could have been easily arranged so that they were put in quarantine. Some of them were sent to quarantine, but in the beginning, the facilities were so bad that those people ran away from there. And so they were blamed for the spread of the pandemic. So we have spent a lot of time fighting the stigmatization that people have been facing, especially our migrant workers. Now, uh, then during the lockdown, there were different sets of challenges and human rights abuses, especially domestic violence went up, uh, child abuse, and violence on children went up, child marriage went up. So all these have human rights. All these are human rights violation. And our organization did a 6-month survey during the lockdown on domestic violence. And at the height of the lockdown, when everything was closed, the violence was at its peak. And then slowly, when it started to open up and people started going out, then the violence decreased to some extent. And also at that time, the services from government and NGOs started to work. So it went, although it has not gone, there's a huge unacceptable level of violence against women and girls in Bangladesh, as it is, I know, in India too. So for the implication for human right is huge, because people have lost their lives and livelihoods. There are health issues. There is a lot of kind of misuse and misgovernance with the stimulus packages and all that. All that is impacting on the lives of the vulnerable people. That is where, and the problem is that the planning for the future does not take into account that some of the impacts of the COVID is long term. So it's not that when the vaccine comes, everything will go away. So for example, the people who were poor, as Mr. Prablok was saying, the people who were vulnerable have become more vulnerable. The people in poverty have gone into extreme poverty. The marginalized sections of the community have lost more of their livelihoods than any other people. So all this has human rights implications for the poor. And I really don't see any serious planning to cope with all that. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was a very, that answered the question very well, and thank you again for answering the same. My next question in this discussion is to Mr. Prablok that what do you believe were the ways of human right violations and which could have been prevented, and what do you think is the way forward for us from here onwards?
See, when the pandemic set in, everything came to a standstill. So offices got shut down. Everything, life was like never before. People couldn't move out of their houses, complete lockdowns, and very limited communication. And that was the time I truly believe that the media, was the only channel, the only way that people could get their information from was the media. And that was the time for media to play a very positive and constructive role in helping prevent those violations. But what happened is media itself became a victim of the propaganda machinery. And to Ms. Sanam's point, that there was a lot of misinformation being spread. Media became a victim of that propaganda for whatever reasons. And instead of playing a positive role where they could have brought all of us together, uh, there was some amount of hatred being spread towards certain communities, certain groups, certain religion, and in every country, the minorities, were being kind of targeted. We know about South Africa, people talk about India, Bangladesh, everywhere. So media could have played a much better role because what happened was everybody was sitting in their houses, nobody was going out, and people were glued to the television screens and to the digital media, the social media. And social media and news channels were full of news like, hey, this particular religious group came from outside, and now they're becoming super spreaders. In Punjab, what happened? There was a religious, very famous religious it's one of the most sacred places of worship in Sikkim. So that religious worker had traveled from some country back to India, and unfortunately, and
So we're not able to hear you very clearly because I think there's some internet connection. Okay. Hello. So I think you're
can
on.
you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. We couldn't hear the last 2 minutes because I think there was some internet issue.
Right. I'm sorry for that.
No worries.
So, yeah, so I'll just quickly repeat myself. So, what happened is everybody was stuck in their houses, glued to the social media, digital media, and the news channels. And what they were hearing from those news channels was a lot of misinformation, a lot of hatred towards certain communities, certain people. And like I give the example of one religious worker from Amritsar who was a very renowned Ragi. He was working at the Golden Temple, the Sri Harmandir Sahib, most sacred place of worship in Sikhism. And he became a victim of the pandemic. He was admitted to the hospital, and unfortunately, he couldn't survive. But what happened after his death was even more sad because suddenly all the media houses started labeling him as the super spreader. That wherever this one man went, he carried the virus and it spread all over. So much so that even for his cremation, the last rites, there was a problem. People were objecting that you cannot cremate this person here. So they had to cremate this very great man in the middle of the night secretly, because people were objecting to his cremation being done in the cremation houses. And he was not cremated inside a cremation house. He was cremated somewhere, in an abandoned land, piece of land. So that is where the media could have played a better role. If media would have, it was the first time for them as well. But had they been more positive about what kind of information they're relaying to the world, I think a lot of violations could have been prevented. Then, for developing countries like India and Bangladesh, we didn't have proper helplines in place. To Ms. Anam's point, like for victims of domestic abuse, child abuse, these cases definitely increased because everybody was locked in those small houses. Uh, we had a lot of problems, and those problems just multiplied. But there were no helplines, there were no community groups, there was no outreach. So the vulnerable lot, they had no one reaching out to them to ask them if they need anything, if they need some kind of support. That all that came much later when the damage had already been done. Third, I think the violations could have been prevented if there was proper communication, planning, and execution from those who were at the helm of affairs. Now, in the same breath, I would also like to say that countries like India, Bangladesh, the developing countries, they have their own challenges, and it's very different. And it will not be right to compare India, Bangladesh with a country like US or Canada, because developing countries have their own challenges. And I sincerely feel that during the pandemic, the governments did all that they could, with whatever limited resources they had. But of course, we know that wasn't enough, and we have learnings for future. So for next time, a lot of stress should be given on planning and communication so that people don't panic. Like what happened in India, the whole world knows. People were walking in the streets. Uh, they walked hundreds and thousands of kilometers. A lot of them died on the way. Most of them didn't even manage to reach where they were intended to reach. So that was because there was lack of communication, there was no messaging, and people panicked. People lost their livelihood and they had nowhere to go. So all this led to more violations. I think media could have uh, just taken charge and helped us not reach where we did. But I'm positive about the future. Molly, your association and your partner association in Bangladesh, you're conducting this webinar, very important. Such public awareness campaigns, webinars are very, very important events, very important, and we're on the right track.
Thank you so much for your kind words, and very rightly said of how media could have played such a huge role in curbing so many things which did happen wrong, and especially considering countries like India and Bangladesh. So, thank you so much again for your answer. Um, my next question is to Miss Anam. Considering we have so many future healthcare professionals here, and I feel that it's very vital for all of them to know of how the effect of the pandemic has been on the health workers, and how do you think it could it could have been taken into control. uh, ma'am I ma'am you're still on mute.
Sorry. Thank you for the question. Health workers have been on the front line of serving people and just being there. So first of all, uh, it everybody was so unprepared. That was the and to some extent that is quite understandable. Nobody was expecting this to blow up in the way that it did. So many health workers went in there without proper PPE or masks or gloves and things that they should have received. So a lot of health workers got infected. So I'm talking not only about doctors and nurses, but people who help in the health sector, people who do the cleaning, especially people who do the cleaning. They did not actually get anything to protect themselves with. So that was a huge human rights abuse, I would say. But the health workers, it could have been, as the days went along, uh, went by, the health workers did start, getting the protection that we needed, that was needed, but there was a lot of inefficiency, around that who is getting what. And the other thing that, in public hospitals, because the need is so great in public hospital, because it costs less, that they were not being able to cope with the amount of PPE or protective gears that was required. But I also want to point out here that because of the privatization of the health sector, there has been a lot of abuse and misuse, and I would say exploitation in the sense that the private hospitals were charging huge amount of money from the patients, which was really causing them a lot of distress. And sometimes when the hospitals were full, then people were forced to go into the private hospitals and they were just being cheated. So that is there also. So it just created a kind of a lot of negative impressions about health workers. Although many of them were working so sincerely and giving their best, but then there was this other side to it. Also, there was a lot of rumor, as Mr. Prablo talked about misinformation. There's a lot of misinformation going around as to what happens in hospitals. Some say that if you go to hospital, you will never come back, you're going to die, because they're going to over medicate you, and you go with coronavirus and you die of kidney failure, for example. So this has created a lot of panic among people, and people don't want to go to the hospitals. So I think the whole thing has been quite mismanaged. But luckily, touch wood, I would say that the spread in Bangladesh, as you must be knowing, has not like erupted in the way that we had thought it would. Our slums are safe, the garment factories are safe. I'm talking about where there's a lot of concentration of people. If that had happened, then there was no way our health service could have handled it. Of course, there's all these other issues about lack of testing. So, there are surveys that say that half the population has it, but it's asymptomatic. So they don't know. Or there's a lot of, because of this stigma, there's a lot of hiding also, not revealing that, so that's how people are getting infected. We know that people have run away from hospitals. So, overall, I would say that it was not managed well. There was a lot of inefficiency, mismanagement involved in the health sector. But at the end of the day, I really salute the frontline health workers for whatever it means, that they've been there and they are the ones who are providing, the support and the care that people need.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was really heartwarming to hear, and very rightly said of how misinformation is leading to such a massive increase in the number of cases. That it's very important at this hour for people to be aware that it's all right to like it's more than all right. It's important for them to communicate and get rid of this misinformation. So thank you for that answer. With that, I'll move on to my next question. Now, as we know, Prablok sir, that no one country can beat this pandemic alone. And with that, how do you think, and why do you think is global solidarity essential for the COVID-19 response?
Thank you, Molly. So yes, global solidarity is the key towards the entire world, everybody, uh, everybody benefiting from the efforts that each country is making towards ensuring that this pandemic comes to an end. Now, what happens is, look at a country like North Korea. Okay, the people there don't even have access to internet. It's a very different world out there, right? And if other countries don't go ahead and put their differences aside and help a country like North Korea with whatever they need, PPE kits, test kits, food, whatever their people need at this time, if we don't do that, then we cannot even think about this pandemic coming to an end. Then you have this issue wherein take a country like Canada. They've got a lot of resources, great country, great resources. They can probably vaccinate each citizen thrice and still be good. And then you look at a country like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, or any of the developing countries, here we don't know whether with the resources that we have, whether we'll be comfortably be able to vaccinate everyone free of cost or not. Okay, so there's a huge difference. Then, of course, we're dependent on each other. Like, for example, there were a lot of PPE kits being made in India, but there were certain countries where that was not happening. So the kits had to go from India to those countries. The testing kits had to come from other countries to India, so we needed them. And globally, we have to hold each other's hand. And to the theme of our conclave also, leave no one behind. We have to ensure that no one is left behind in this fight, in this fight that we have to fight together. If somebody is left behind, we're all left behind. It's all or nothing. Either we're all moving forward or none of us are moving forward. So it's very important that we hold each other's hand. Global solidarity is the right now the secret recipe towards the entire world, getting rid of this pandemic. Otherwise, it's a distant dream.
Absolutely, and I feel that it couldn't have been put in a better way of if even one person is left behind, we're all left behind. So thank you so much for telling all our participants about that. With that, I would come to my last question for like as per my agenda, we have questions pouring in the chat box for both of you, and we'll move on to the Q&A session in a bit. But before that, I would first like to ask Miss Anam as to how can students, and how can students in general, and let's say medical students specifically, considering we have medical students here in our webinar listening to us right now, contribute to ensure that human rights aren't a luxury. And this, I would say, is the most important question for today's webinar, because that's what we were building up till now in our discussion. So over to you, ma'am.
Talking to young people is my favorite, hobby. I love talking to young people. But I want to go back a little bit to your previous question to Mr. Prablok about the vaccination. That absolutely on spot, that if ever there was a time for global solidarity, it is now, because of the globalization, because how people travel and go, everybody's going here and there and everywhere, that it'll be so short-sighted not to consider everybody in the vaccination. The other thing that we are a little worried about is the profit making tendency of big companies. Already we have heard that a very well-known business house is going to import this vaccine for a certain price, and then sell it for another higher price. So that is something we have to guard against also, so that again it does not end up in corruption and profit making. And this is really the call for public good, and that is what we all have to strive for. Going to your question about how medical students, I'm sure even in Bangladesh, in India, but in Bangladesh, the youth population have just jumped in to volunteer their time, you know, to helping people, distributing food, really at the risk of their lives also, because at that time we couldn't give them any PPE, any mask or anything. So they really kind of helped in the burial and fighting stigmatization, or taking food and other necessary things to them. Especially as medical students, oh my God, the need for health, even with the vaccine coming, will be for healthcare, will be so massive, that they can be right there in helping the doctors and others, because after all, uh, a medical student will have much more knowledge than a non-medical student when there is a health emergency, obviously. The thing I would say that, one of the most basic quality or a feature of youth is courage, I think. In Bangla, we say sahosh, and they have to stand up for what's wrong and what is right, and really stand up against what is wrong, and stand up for what is right. And as you know, this time the kind of slogan is that, stand up for human rights. It is the youth population who have to show the way and stand up uh, against corruption, against misuse of funds, against human rights abuses, against violence, against child marriage, and all the social ills that is afflicting our societies. So because they are medical students, they have a special responsibility. But as they are young and they are in this wonderful, time that we used to be once upon a time, I think that they have a huge role to play. And we are looking towards them to honestly save our society. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that lovely answer, ma'am. It's the same question to sir. Like, I would love to ask the same question to you as well.
Sure, sure. Ms. Sanam has put it beautifully. She's covered all the points that one could think of. So, number one, profit making. For medical students, it's very important to uh, to take a decision for the betterment of the entire world, which is how much how much profit are you okay with? There are a lot of margins in the medical industry. In India, we know this. Certain procedures were very costly. The government intervened recently, and now those procedures are very affordable. So the medical fraternity, especially the students, they've got to take a call on how much they're willing to go, towards helping your own community in such fight, and in times like the pandemic. The second thing is uh, volunteer, like Mr. Nam said. I would say the students, be it medical students or students in general, we need to have this passion for compassion. That is the time, and we've got the right kind of energy. It's the right age, the right stamina, and we've got all the time. I know, it's difficult for those in the medical colleges, but we can still take our time to volunteer. There are so many causes. You should identify with a cause that you relate with, and you should give it your everything. Not just your, like in India, you call it daswant. That concept is there everywhere. It's just a different word for it. So 10% of your income you should give towards charity. That's one thing, but 10% of your time as well. So identify causes that you truly believe in and give it your everything, because in the end, that is all that will matter. Everything else will be left behind. Only the good that you do will carry forward. I'm sorry for that. So that's very important. And we're talking about courage. I was 20 when I started the organization. So I was 20 years old. I was in second year of college, and we heard this news that certain people were acquitted, and we were like, why? And we started this public awareness campaign. We did it for a lot of years, a lot of cases, and then finally we decided to move towards pure community welfare. So when we moved towards community welfare, we thought, okay, what is it that we need to work on? So we identified that we need to work towards respectable funeral services. So we're doing that. Then we identified we need to work towards respectable livelihood services. So we're doing that. So as a youth, I often tell people when I was 20 years old, I was very courageous. And the things I did back then, I'm telling you, I wouldn't behave the same way now. So that what that means is the revolution, or the protest that we did back then. If I was in a similar situation now, I wouldn't do it. Am I less courageous? Maybe. Do I think differently? Maybe. But was I right in doing what I did when I was 20? I was foolish, but I was right. So I was foolish because I did risk it to a great extent. I did risk my life. A lot of people, that is where they stop from standing up for others' rights. But it's very important that you use your youthfulness towards a cause, and it will lead to miracles. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was surely very inspiring, and it's so nice to know that you started off at such a young age of 20 years, and it's not a, it's a very huge thing to start an organization at such a young age. So thank you so much for both of your inspiring words. With that, we can move to the Q&A session, as I have questions pouring in the chat box for the both of you. Um, the first question is to Prabhlok sir, that what is the bare minimum a person can do when they're subjected or they come across a human right violation?
See, the bare minimum you got to do is you got to be strong. That is the bare minimum. That is the make it or break it point. If you become weak, you lose the battle. If you're strong from within, I'm not asking you to react or to respond, but be strong within. And you should always remember that in life there will always be points where you'll be at a high and then there'll be lows. And neither will the high be there forever, neither will your low point be there forever. So what matters is when you're at a high, you need to be really kind to people, passion for compassion, you need to be nice to people, you need to do good. So that when you're low, when you're in your, in times when you're really low, that is when your karma will help you, when whatever you did when you were, when you were doing good will come to your rescue. But you've got to be strong. If it's all about willpower. So the bare minimum you got to do is got to be strong. I know there are a lot of horrendous situations people get into. You know, all kinds of human rights violations are taking place. But you got to be strong. You got to believe in yourself, and you don't have to lose faith and hope. That's the bare minimum, and that's not. People say that's everything you can do. No, that's the bare minimum. Don't lose hope. Don't lose faith. Now, when you're strong, the rest of the things will automatically fall in place because you're strong. You'll face the situation, and then you'll talk to someone. You'll try to think of how to get out of it, and there are other resources one can use. But if you're not strong and if you get weak, you lose the battle there. So,
Thank you so much. I think many, I think all of us needed to hear that. And thank you again for that answer.
most
Uh,
certainly. And for everyone's information, very irrelevant, but how we pronounce my name is Prabloch and not
okay.
Prablo.
Uh,
That's all right. Yeah.
I deeply apologize for that. Thank you so much for telling us about it, and I'm very sorry for it again.
Perfectly fine. Yeah.
And thank you so much. With that, the next question is to Anam ma'am. The question is that is the Manushar Jono Foundation currently doing anything for the rights of the laid back communities of Bangladesh, and to be more specific, for the rights of the indigenous population of Bangladesh? Ma'am, you're on mute.
Yes. We do have a large program in the Chittagong Hill Tracts and also in the plain lands and we call them Adibashi, though you will not believe that we are prevented from calling them Adibashi. They're supposed to be called small tribal groups or something like that. Anyway, but they want to be called Adibashi and we call them Adibashi. Um, we have programs basically to support them in their livelihoods, education, and preservation of their culture and identity, which is extremely important, which is very much linked to human rights. Uh, Unfortunately, it's a very small, Bangladesh is a very homogeneous, population. We have very little diversity. And I call it that we are suffering from the arrogance of the majority, and we really don't treat our minorities very well. I'm very sad to say that because uh, you're too young, of course, to know maybe, but Bangladesh fought a war. We fought a war and became independent on the basis of being able to live with our own cultural um, identity and our own language. And now that we have attained independence, now we are trying to oppress these people, our Adivashi population, and grabbing their land, or not letting them, not supporting them in their, preserving their, cultural identity. So it's a very, I feel quite pessimistic, honestly. I'm sorry to say, sound so pessimistic. We are trying, and we work with them and support them as best as we can. We like to tell the whole world that Bangladesh is a multicultural, multi-religious country where there's a lot of communal harmony. And in a sense, maybe it's not as bad as I'm saying it, because the religious minorities do have, a certain, I mean, the oppression against them is not that, that overt. But because the Adivashi population, especially in the Chittagong hill tracts, is a very beautiful hilly area, and they have more land than the land that plain land people have, because Bangladesh is a very small country with a lot of people. So everybody's eye is on that place. And then there are greedy businessmen who are trying to take, evict them and take their land away. So we work at different levels with policy advocacy, helping, working, and it's a very poverty, I mean, all the indicators, health, education, everything is lower than the national average of the Adivashi people, which is quite shameful. So we work, with them, and try to go back to our constitution, which says that everybody has equal rights, and our legal instruments that gives, every person the same, rights as, all citizens. But it's quite an uphill task.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you so much for explaining in detail about about the question. The next question is to Sir. The one of the participants has asked that since the theme this year is to recover better, but since a lot of damage has already been done through the course of the pandemic, what are some things that we can still do at the individual and institutional level to ensure that we build back better and we come back better?
So, what happened is when the pandemic took place, I was not in India and I was in Canada. So, I've seen how they dealt with the situation there. And then I came back through one of the Vande Bharat flights that the government of India introduced way back in June. And, so I came to India and firsthand I witnessed what was happening here. Of course, day to day, I used to get to know what was happening, but I was on the ground effective June. So a lot of people often say that social distancing, because of the pandemic now, that it's the need of the hour. Now, what's happening is in Western countries like Canada, US, and all these countries, for years they've been practicing social distancing. They don't get too close to each other in public places everywhere. If they're standing in a queue, they're maintaining their distance. So it's funny how the concept of social distancing was already there, without even knowing that they were socially distancing themselves from each other. But it's something new for a country like India, where if you're standing in a queue, then the person right behind you it looks like as if the person is glued to you, and there's nothing you can do about it because it's been like this for so many years. And so, as a society, we are very new to this concept of social distancing in India, and because of the population also. You know, the way we made our government buildings. If we plan, okay, this is for 100 people, will there be a small room where 100 people will be standing in a queue, getting their traffic violations or whatever done, for example, and there's no social distancing possible. But the way forward, recovery, to your point, is hygiene, very important. So we've got to get this hygiene thing into our slum areas, where we have this vulnerable lot living. So we need to give them a better life, better hygiene, because if those living in the slums, if a higher level of hygiene reaches them, then of course we are better prepared for a pandemic in the future, God forbidden. But if there was social distancing already in place, if there was a lot of stress on hygiene already in countries like India, Bangladesh, developing countries, which are mostly very populated countries, then things wouldn't have been this bad. And unfortunately, when I came to India, I did become prey to the pandemic. I was tested positive, and my entire family was tested positive. My dad was in the hospital for 10 days, so I witnessed it firsthand. And believe it or not, I was taking all the precautions. So when I reached India, I tested negative, everything good. I quarantined myself, everything was perfect. I was wearing the mask, I was washing my hands, doing everything. But the reason I became a patient of, I became a part of this whole pandemic situation is because people I was meeting when I used to go to the market, they were not doing it. The shopkeeper wouldn't wear a mask. And if you tell them, hey, you're not wearing a mask, they say, oh, this is all a scam, you know. So till date, majority of people think it's a scam. They say it's a scam, sir. It's all for making money and this and that, and they don't believe it. And I don't blame them. Uh, you know, Certain people will not believe it till it actually hits them. But the way to recovery is proper hygiene, education, awareness. Now, after the vaccine comes and everything happens, that is the time we need to accelerate the awareness campaigns. We, of course, whatever we're doing during the pandemic is needed, but we need to multiply this after we get rid of the pandemic so that next time we are much better prepared. There are villages which are not letting health authorities enter their villages. There are people which are not letting health authorities test them. So, and because they have notions, and it's for them it's a scam, and we need to educate everyone that it's not a scam and that they should be wary of such scams in future.
Very rightly mentioned, sir. And I think the part about the scam is something which I'm assuming all of us here have faced somewhere or the other, with someone, maybe a shopkeeper or some. I think sometimes even in our own family, members or relatives also behave as if it's just a scam. It's not a pandemic. So thank you again. My next question is to Anam ma'am. One of the participants has asked that what measures do you think can be taken regarding the mass population living in slum areas?
Uh, as I told you that very, very surprisingly, our slums did not get infected. There are very few. I mean, BRAC has done a huge survey and they have found that they did not get. But, many of them could be asymptomatic. And there are all kinds of theories as to why they did not get it. Maybe they're out so much in the sun and they have so much vitamin D in their bodies, or whatever the reason. And there's a very interesting anecdote that I want to share. Somebody asked a mechanic who repairs cars, that you don't wear mask, aren't you afraid you'll get corona? He said that, sir, I won't get it. We live by drinking kerosene every day, so corona won't be able to. So probably, there's a kind of immunity. But to answer your question about what can we do in the slums, it is not, this is not only a health issue. As it is, they have bad health. There's a lot of like, diseases, waterborne diseases, because the water is not clean. And there are security issues in slums. So as it is, life is very difficult for them. And especially now, in during this time when people have lost their livelihoods, many of them live in the slum, because the people who work in the non-formal sector, they are the ones whose livelihoods has been destroyed the most. So there, I don't know if your question was about how to support people in the slum. Was it related to health, or was it? Because yes, people in the slum or in the urban areas need a lot of support to get over this very, very difficult. People live in very congested uh, you know uh, areas, and there are different type of health concerns, and people could be asymptomatic. So I mean, uh, to help them out of this situation, one is to understand that urban poverty is very, very, very serious, and they are the people in the non-formal sector who are most likely to go below the poverty level. So they have to be supported. Those who were doing small, very petty enterprise, they have to be helped with stimulus package. I want to go a little bit back to the question that you asked, Mr. Prabloch, that mm, how can people uh, kind of come out of this. The state has a huge role to play. They have to really govern the stimulus package that they're doing better. It has to be more efficiently um, rolled out, with less corruption and nepotism and all those things that come with bad governance. There has been in the health sector massive issues of corruption. So if that continues, people have to be supported, and the economy has to be revived, for people to come back to where they were. So that is, and our the people in the slum are so industrious. Everybody is doing something. Everybody, I mean, they are trying to, they totally run the economy of the of cities, and they have such low kind of uh, their well-being is so compromised at this time. So I think that people in the slums, especially in urban slums, need to be supported with cash, with health services, with education. Women have to be supported to get back to their jobs. Many of the women who were working part-time in people's homes, because of the fear of COVID, they were asked, not to work anymore. So, and for people, uh, I would say about social, distancing, my theory is that these people, if they want to do social distancing, they can't, because unless they go out and work, they have nothing to eat in their families, with their families. So we have to take all this into consideration when we talk about going back. I mean, it can't be business as usual. We have to think of innovative and new things to be able to come back to where we were before.
Thank you so much. And I think by focusing on the slum population, the point which Prabhlot sir had raised about how they believe, like that's a very major part of the population who believe that it's a scam. So I think that will directly be addressed, and we could make a difference. And with that, the next question is about global solidarity, which Prabhlot sir had answered. The question is that it, like, considering it's the secret recipe not just to tackle the pandemic but in a broad spectrum as well, but there are still incidences during the pandemic where so many countries were accusing China of spreading the virus, and at the same time China was not taking accountability. And simultaneously in the background, Britain moving towards Brexit, or USA going through a political instability, conflicts between China and India for a territorial aspect, initially, and many more, like many such cases, which show that world isn't, as united as it should be. How do you think we can initiate global solidarity and go forward with it, and how much difference do you think that we can make as citizens, especially youth, mainly the youth? How can we bring a difference for the same? I'm so sorry for such a elaborate question, but
No, it's a very,
yeah, over to you, sir.
very meaningful question, and I like the question. So, when we talk about global solidarity, we have to completely treat it separate from politics. So, politics is something that we need to alienate when we're talking about anything and everything. So, otherwise, all these points will come up. For example, uh, India and China, right? So, I was at a I was at a conference in Nepal, I think last year or last to last year. I was there both the years. So, in one of those conferences, their country director, the UN country director there in Nepal, he was asked, what is the difference between a country like China and a country like India, when it comes to implementing your policies or getting your policies introduced. So he said, if you go to China, it'll take you 4 years to convince the government, but it'll take them 2 seconds to implement it once they're convinced. In India, they said it'll take you 2 seconds to convince the government, but it'll take you 40 years to implement it. Okay, so that's one side of it. Second is the politics. So when we're talking about solidarity, we cannot mix it with things related to politics, like territorial ambitions of one country vis-a-vis another country, because we don't know. Let's leave politics to the politicians, right? They're there for a reason. They like it, they enjoy it, people vote for them, and so let them do their job. Otherwise, if we start discussing politics, like me and you and everybody on this call, if we start discussing politics, we'll start hating each other. Yeah. And it's a fact. And those at the helm of affairs, those in power and those in opposition, they're best buddies. They don't care. They really don't hate each other. But the followers of those leaders, they start hating each other. So for solidarity, we need to stop discussing politics or anything political. For example, hey, does this piece of land belong to this country or X country or Y country? Let the countries decide. Those at the helm of affairs will manage. It's not for the common public to discuss because you'll end up fighting with each other. And then we cannot reach at a point where we talk about global solidarity. But I know the person who asked this question is probably asking that when the leaders of these countries are fighting with each other, how are we talking about solidarity, right? I'm guessing that's what the point is. So here's the thing: when it comes to medical emergencies, PPE kits, all that, when US was blaming China, China was still sending test kits to US, right? US was saying, you're killing our people. China was like, we're sending test kits. That is what was happening, right? And I'm not siding with China. Probably the virus originated from there. No one knows. But what I'm saying is, even when people were pointing fingers at each other, countries were helping. I think India sent a lot of relief material to Pakistan. And at the border, there were gunshots being fired. Okay, so the guns were being fired because that is why the armies are there. It's their job to look at what's happening, what's not happening, and it's completely their job. And they're really, 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 I would say, qualified to deal with it. Both the armies. So, but even when there was a conflict, even when there was something going on at the border, I think India sent a lot of relief material to Pakistan and to other countries, and that is how it should have been done. Similarly, USA, China, everybody, they helped out even their foes. I wouldn't say enemies, but even countries they considered their foes, they helped them out. And that is the idea of solidarity that I think we need to move ahead with. Of course, there'll be something happening at the border, and that will always happen. You cannot expect India and China to sit at the border, and that old saying, Hindi chini bhai bhai. That's good, but you can't expect our armies to be doing that on a day-to-day basis. That'll be the most ideal world, and that'll be what Lord Buddha and all these great people, Guru Nanak and Jesus Christ and everybody else probably wanted us to do. But because we're human, we have our own notions, we have our own ideas. conflicting with others. So there will be some level of conflict here and there. But overall, if India knows they need to help some other country out with medical emergency, they're doing that. Similarly, other countries are also doing that. So that is the solidarity we're talking about. We're not talking about eradicating your historical differences, because those differences are about piece of land, territory, this and that. And that's a very lengthy thing, and that's very idealistic for us to expect these countries to sort it out amongst themselves. Yeah.
Absolutely. It was, a great question and a great response to the same. And like you very rightly pointed out, that in spite of the countries blaming each other, they were helping each other and, providing resources, at the same time. So that is one observation which I feel all of us need to see. And with that, I think I'll ask the last question to Anam ma'am. And the question is that the legal procedures regarding human rights violation are so lengthy and uncertain in Bangladesh that it discourages people a lot, to take a step against it. So, what do you think are, the feasible solutions to this?
Absolutely. It takes so much time uh, to to really get to the place where you want to when you file a case, or to see a perpetrator really uh, face the consequences of what he or she has done in terms of violating the human rights of others, that people just lose patience midway. And my experience mostly is, of course, with issues of violence against women. We say women's rights are human rights, so that is a huge human rights violation of women. And they I mean, just to give an example, the conviction rate is 2% for rape, in Bangladesh. There is a culture of impunity, and perpetrators somehow know that they will not have to face any punishment. They'll somehow use the law, the loopholes, the lack of witnesses, or the lack of protection of witness and victims or something, and sort of be free. So it is a huge problem that human rights activists and human rights defenders are facing, to because it is like people lose faith in the law. And yet there's no other alternative but to use the law, to get justice for people. We have been struggling. There's a draft of the anti-discrimination law that we have drafted, civil society organizations with many others, and it is lying with the law minister, who has promised to have it enacted. So we think that the specific human rights abuses that happens to especially marginalized population, like persons with disability, untouchable population, and sex workers or transgenders and others, it would be easier for them to file cases if that law was enacted. So that is a hope that we have. However, as you know, in our part of the world, that there's no dearth of laws and policies. It is the implementation of those laws which is very, very challenging, and the problem has to do more with one is, of course, mindsets, and others of being careless and powerless. People have no way to get their message through. But it is also the lack of accountability, and the people responsible not doing their job uh, when they're supposed to. I mean, not attending to the responsibility they have at the right time, and also that there's no repercussion for it. So a huge lack of monitoring, and a lack of accountability ends up with, so as we say, that because of bad governance, human rights people face human rights violation. But you ask me, how do we get out of that? It is just a combination of activism, of pushing, of lobbying, of advocacy. Like, for example, I know I'm making it very long and your time is over. I just want to give an example that marital rape is not recognized in our law. Unfortunately, she has to be under 12 to claim marital rape, which is so ridiculous. So recently there was an awful incident of a child of 14 who died because of marital rape. So we made a writ petition with the High Court, and they did look at it quite seriously and has show caused the government to show why this is not a discrimination and against the constitution, violating the rights of married girls, married girls and women. So, I mean, I'm just saying that if, however flawed or however long it takes, that is the course we have to keep on pushing. We have to keep on pushing and creating pressure from different angles. You see, for people's rights to be ensured, we have to work at many different levels simultaneously. So the activism has to be there, the lobbying has to be there, the changing of mindset and awareness raising and be making people aware of laws and policies that protect them. That should also go on. So it's a very uphill task, I would say, but then we don't have any other way to do it. This is the way that we have to go on. So I don't know if my answer is satisfactory, but that's what I have to say.
And with your due permission, I'd like to add to Ms. Anand's point. So
Yes,
I
yes.
think judicial reforms are very important. For example, fast track courts for rape cases. Such reforms, judicial reforms, are the need of the hour, and it's for the activists, it's for the civil society to build pressure for these reforms to take place. 2% conviction rate is indeed, something we should make sure it becomes history. And so judicial reforms, fast track courts, a lot of such things we need to ensure.
Thank you so much, sir. And I think Bangladesh and India's condition with respect to this is quite similar. That is what, like, I gathered after, hearing Anna ma'am also out. So thank you so much for adding on to that. And with that, I think I've already exceeded the time limit a little, and would love to conclude our webinar for today here. And one thing which I feel, I can conclude is that how human rights are a key in shaping the pandemic response. And um, how, how they, like, how human rights put people in the center stage. So whichever responses that are shaped by and that respect to human rights, they always result in better outcomes, in beating the pandemic and ensuring healthcare to everyone, and most, importantly, preserving human dignity. So I would like to thank, both Prabhlot sir and Anna ma'am for joining us today, and for, for such a detailed and wholesome discussion and answering all the questions so patiently. So thank you so much again. And with that, I'll also, I'm just sharing the post webinar form for all our participants to fill, so you can fill the same. In case we missed out on any question, and if you would like to ask, feel free to email me or Tasnia, who is the Vice President for External Affairs at Bangladesh, and we'll get back to you. And yes, I would stop rambling, and thank you so much again.
No.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure, and a pleasure to meet you, get to know you, Mr. Prabloch. I would love to get in touch with you and maybe talk about this common issues that we have. I'll send you an email if I get your email address. Thank you.
Absolutely, ma'am. The pleasure is all mine. I really look forward to working with you. And Molly, great show. Everybody, all the participants in this webinar, you guys are the most important people here, not me and Miss Anam. All 155, 153, barring me and Miss Anam, you are the most important people in this meeting. It's all about you, because you're giving your time to for this cause, to probably learn something, to see what's going on with regards to human rights. And if you care for it because you're here, I'm assuming you do care for human rights, and that is what matters. Molly, great show. Thanks, ma'am. We'll be in touch. My email ID is
Yes, we will be. Thank you very much.
info@humanrights.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye, and stay safe.
Right. All right.
Thank you so much. Sir, what I'll do is that I'll share your email ID with ma'am so that she can get into touch with you accordingly.
Perfect, perfect.
Thank you so much again.
Most welcome. Thanks.